Johnny Carson heard Clint Eastwood's words, turned to the cameras, placed his microphone on the desk, and told the entire studio. This interview ends here. It was March 1982. The Tonight Show starring Johnny Carson. Studio 6B in Burbank. Another Wednesday night. The monologue had gone well. The audience was warm. Ed McMahon was in fine form, his laugh booming at all the right moments. Everything was running smoothly. Tonight's guest was Clint Eastwood, Hollywood's biggest star, the man who had defined cool for 2 decades. He walked onto the stage to thunderous applause, waved to the audience with that economical gesture he'd perfected, and settled into the guest chair with his characteristic ease. Johnny leaned back in his chair, shuffling his blue cue cards, ready to launch into the kind of easy, charming conversation he'd conducted thousands of times. Clint was a good guest. Charismatic, naturally funny despite his tough guy image, always had good stories from movie sets. So Clint, Johnny began with a smile. I understand you just wrapped filming on a new Western. Tell us about it. Clint nodded, that slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Yeah, we finished last month. Beautiful location shoot up in Montana. Incredible scenery, great crew. And the story? What's it about? Clint shifted slightly in his chair. It's about a man trying to outrun his past. He's made mistakes, serious ones, and he thinks if he can just get far enough away, start over somewhere new, maybe those mistakes won't follow him. Johnny nodded, expecting the usual Hollywood pitch. Sounds intriguing. Does he succeed? Does he outrun his past? Clint's expression changed. Something flickered across his face, something that wasn't part of the scripted interview persona. He looked down at his hands for a moment, then back at Johnny. No, Clint said quietly. He doesn't. Because you can't outrun what you've done. It follows you. It waits for you. And eventually you have to face it. The studio was quiet. Not the uncomfortable quiet of a joke that didn't land, but something else. Something heavier. Johnny felt it immediately. His smile didn't quite reach his eyes anymore. Well, that's pretty heavy stuff for a Western. It's based on something that happened to me, Clint said. And there it was. The shift. The moment when a pleasant celebrity interview became something else entirely. Johnny's hand tightened slightly on his cue cards. Oh? Carson stopped mid-interview. The entire studio froze. Clint leaned forward slightly. Johnny, can I tell you something? Something I've never said publicly before? Every producer in the control room tensed. Director Bobby Quinn's voice came through Johnny's earpiece. Keep it light, Johnny. Redirect him. We're running long anyway. But Johnny didn't redirect. He looked at Clint Eastwood, this man he'd known professionally for years, had interviewed maybe a dozen times, had always kept at that perfect distance of friendly professionalism, and saw something he'd never seen before. Vulnerability. Real, raw vulnerability. Of course, Johnny said, setting down his cue cards. Go ahead. Clint took a breath. In 1964, before I was famous, before Sergio Leone cast me in those spaghetti westerns, I was nobody. Just another struggling actor in Los Angeles taking whatever work I could get. Small TV roles. Commercials. Barely making rent. The audience was completely silent. This wasn't the Clint Eastwood they knew, the man with no name, Dirty Harry, the laconic action hero. This was someone else. I was married. Had a young daughter. My wife was pregnant with our second child. And I was terrified. Terrified I'd never make it as an actor. Terrified I couldn't provide for my family. Terrified I'd wasted years chasing a dream that would never happen. Johnny nodded slowly, his full attention on Clint now, the show completely forgotten. I got offered a job. Clint continued. A Western TV series in Italy. Decent money, more than I'd ever made. But it meant leaving for 6 months. Being away from my wife and daughter. Missing the birth of my second child. I told myself it was for them. For their future. That this was the opportunity that would change everything. He paused, his jaw tightening. But that wasn't the whole truth. The whole truth was that I wanted to run. I wanted to escape the pressure of being a husband and father who couldn't provide. I wanted to be somewhere where I wasn't failing every day. So I took the job. I went to Italy. And I missed the birth of my son. The studio was so quiet you could hear the soft hum of the stage lights. When I came back 6 months later, Clint said, his voice rougher now, my son didn't know me. He cried when I tried to hold him. My daughter barely remembered me. My wife, she'd been through those 6 months alone. Labor. Sleepless nights. All of it. Alone. Because I ran. Johnny's expression had shifted completely. The host persona was gone. This was just two men talking. Did it work? Johnny asked quietly. Did running solve anything? No, Clint said. I got famous. The movies were successful. The career took off. But that guilt? That knowledge that I'd abandoned them when they needed me most? That never went away. It's been 18 years, Johnny. 18 years. And I still can't look at my son without remembering that I chose my career over being there for his birth. Subscribe and leave a comment, because the most powerful part of this story is still ahead. In the control room, producer Fred de Cordova was on his feet. We need to wrap this. This is too heavy. Tell Johnny to go to commercial. But Bobby Quinn, hand on the talkback button, hesitated. Wait, he said. Just wait. On stage, Johnny Carson did something he almost never did. He looked directly into camera one, not with his usual twinkle, not with that conspiratorial smile he used for jokes, but with complete seriousness. Ladies and gentlemen, Johnny said, his voice steady, I need to stop this interview for a moment. Clint looked confused. Johnny, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. Johnny held up a hand. No. Don't apologize. But I need to say something. To you. To everyone watching. He turned back to Clint. I have 3 sons. Rick, Chris, and Corey. And I've spent 30 years building a career in television. 30 years of late nights, of working when they were sleeping, of missing dinners and baseball games and school plays because the show had to go on. The audience was completely still. Ed McMahon had tears in his eyes. And I told myself the same thing you did. Johnny continued. That I was doing it for them. That providing financially was the same as being present. That success would somehow make up for all the moments I missed. He picked up a cue card from his desk. Not to read from it, but just to hold something. But it doesn't make up for it, does it? Johnny's voice cracked slightly. My oldest son Rick, he's 29 years old now. And sometimes when I see him, I realize there are entire years of his childhood I wasn't present for. Not because I was in Italy making movies, but because I was right here in Burbank making television. Which somehow feels worse. Clint was staring at Johnny, stunned. I can't count the number of times I came home at 2 a.m. to a dark house. Johnny said. My boy's asleep. My wife asleep. And I'd tell myself it was worth it. That this career, this show, this success, it was all for them. He set the cue card down carefully. But you know what I've realized, Clint? And maybe it's taken me 30 years to figure this out, but better late than never. They didn't need me to be successful. They needed me to be there. The cameras stayed locked on Johnny. The control room had gone completely silent. No one was breathing. Backstage, he made a choice no producer would have ever allowed. Johnny stood up. He walked around his desk, something he very rarely did during interviews, and sat on the edge of it, closer to Clint. I'm going to do something I never do, Johnny said. I'm going to end this interview early. Not because what you said was inappropriate. Not because we're running long. But because I think we've both said something that matters more than entertainment. He looked at the audience. How many of you have children? About half the hands in the studio went up. How many of you work long hours? How many of you have told yourselves that you're doing it for them? Almost all the hands stayed up. Some people were crying now. Johnny turned back to Clint. I can't give you back that day in 1964 when your son was born. You can't give me back the thousands of nights I spent here instead of at home. But maybe we can stop running from it. Stop pretending the career was always worth the cost. Clint's stoic facade had completely crumbled. He was openly crying now, this icon of masculine toughness weeping on national television. I called my son before I came here tonight, Clint said, his voice breaking. For the first time in months. We talked for an hour. About nothing important. About everything important. And when we hung up, he said, I love you, Dad. He's 28 years old, Johnny. And I think that might be the first time he said that and I really heard it. But this was the moment no one in the studio, nor anyone at home, ever saw coming. Johnny reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his wallet. From it, he extracted a small photograph, worn at the edges from years of being carried. This is my son Rick, Johnny said, holding it up. He's 5 years old in this picture. I took it on a Sunday afternoon, one of maybe 10 Sundays I had off that entire year. He wanted me to watch him ride his bike. He'd just learned. No training wheels. He was so proud. Johnny's voice was thick with emotion now. And I almost said no. I almost said I was too tired. That I needed to prepare for Monday's show. That being a good father meant working hard to provide, not playing in the driveway. He looked at the photograph for a long moment. But something made me say yes. And for one afternoon, I watched my son ride his bike in circles. He must have gone around that driveway 100 times, and every single time he looked at me to make sure I was watching. And I was. For once, I actually was. Johnny handed the photograph to Clint. I've carried this for 24 years. As a reminder. Not of success. Not of career. But of the one Sunday afternoon I got it right. Clint held the photograph carefully, looking down at the image of young Rick Carson on his bicycle. Keep it, Johnny said. Johnny, I can't. Keep it, Johnny insisted. You told me tonight about running from your past. About guilt you can't escape. Well, I'm telling you, don't spend the rest of your life running. Call your son. Not someday. Tomorrow. Tell him what you told me tonight. Tell him you're sorry. Tell him you're trying to do better. Clint nodded, unable to speak, still holding the photograph. Johnny turned to camera one. We're going to go to commercial now. And when we come back, we're not going to do more interviews. We're just going to play some music. Because I think everyone, here in the studio and at home, needs a moment to call someone they love. The studio erupted. Not in applause, but in something raw. People were standing, crying, holding each other. Ed McMahon was openly sobbing. Doc Severinsen had set down his trumpet and was wiping his eyes. Johnny walked over to Clint and pulled him into an embrace. Two of Hollywood's most famous men, hugging on live television while millions watched. Share and subscribe. Make sure this story is never forgotten. The show went to commercial. During the break, Johnny told the producers to cut the rest of the scheduled segments. When they came back, Doc and the band played instrumental music for the remaining 20 minutes. No jokes. No interviews. Just music. The next day, Clint Eastwood flew to see his son. They spent the weekend together. Just the two of them. No cameras. No interviews. Just a father trying to make up for lost time. Johnny Carson kept a copy of that Tonight Show episode in his private collection. He never allowed it to be rerun. Too personal, he said. Too raw. But the photograph he gave to Clint? Clint carried it in his wallet for the rest of his life. When he directed his film about fathers and sons 5 years later, he dedicated it to Johnny, who taught me that success means nothing if you're running from what matters. Johnny called his own sons that night after the show. All three of them. Long conversations. Real conversations. The studio audience from that night still talks about it. Not as the night they saw Clint Eastwood, but as the night Johnny Carson reminded America that being present matters more than being successful. The interview that ended early became the most important conversation of both men's careers.